I don't usually partake in the genre, but I'm a sucker for a well-made action movie in those rare times that they come up. It's just that for the most part the genre doesn't really appeal to me all that much because they don't focus so much on the stories, and most of the directors have a way too chaotic approach in how they stage the action sequences. I'm also not huge on the espionage film genre either. They can just at times get a little convoluted for me and try too hard to have a big twist. That said, I was anticipating Atomic Blonde, primarily for the direction by David Leitch, who did some work on John Wick, which, while not the perfect spectacle of an action movie that everybody makes it out to be, was solidly entertaining from strictly an action movie perspective. However, with his first credited directorial debut, I didn't really take much away from it. Atomic Blonde is one of the most perfect examples of an average movie. It's not bad, really, but it does almost nothing that I'll remember except for one thing that I'll get to later on. The story is as basic as spy flick with a MacGuffin as it gets. There really is nothing particularly special about the plot and story of Atomic Blonde. There are some twists at the end that honestly make the movie a bit more confusing than it does create a wow, what an answer type scenario. It makes the characters more difficult in terms of what they're trying to get out of everything. It also uses this framing device that's seen all the time of the main character telling a story, which really gets on my nerves, especially in action movies. It entirely takes out the stakes in a scene because we know that ultimately they're gonna be fine. There's no real way to get invested in the action if the characters involved are invincible and the audience knows it. Not every movie needs to be The Raid, where you never know what characters will survive, but it's usually good to have a few. Mad Max Fury Road had several characters, not all of them are leads per se, but they all lent a hand to the action, so we weren't sure how many of them would be killed off. Because of Atomic Blonde's small central cast though, this isn't really possible. Speaking of the cast, I liked Charlize Theron in this, but she didn't really have much to do. Her character is so flat, but she did play it cool enough, but the whole time I was just sitting unattached to this cold character who didn't have much personality at all. James McAvoy had fun at times, but it wasn't enough for me to get really invested in his character. And the rest of the characters really don't do much. The only exception really was Eddie Marsan, who I think I only really found myself attached to because he was one of my favorite characters in Edgar Wright's movie The World's End. So it's nothing I can really reward the film itself for. So with characters I didn't really care that much about and a formulaic story, the action sequences will have to fight an uphill battle to really get me to enjoy this movie. The big problem here though is that the movie doesn't have many action scenes. Off the top of my head, I can think of 3 in this almost 2-hour-long movie. The movie leans much more heavily on the espionage genre than it does the action genre. It sucks because Leitch is clearly a better action director than he is with anything else. The little action that is in the film is well shot and features some impressive stunt work. It's some fun stuff when it actually comes up. In particular, and this is what I said I would get back to, the film features one of the best single action scenes I've seen in a long time. It's this 10 to 15 minute long scene that, while you can clearly tell where the edits were made, it's made to look like one shot. Anybody who knows me knows that Birdman is one of my all-time favorite films, and that employed a similar technique to its quote-unquote one-take style. But still, it's just such a good scene. It starts at the bottom of this building. She takes an elevator up and slowly works her way down the stairs, taking on usually about 2 people at a time. She actually seems vulnerable in this scene thanks to the lack of music, which was a great choice. It makes the action seem so much more gripping and realistic. And while we know Charlize's character has main character armor, Eddie Marsan's character gets involved and he's already bleeding out from a gunshot wound, and he acts as the main vulnerability in this scene. It doesn't stop at the building either. There's a getaway car chase that's still a part of this one take. The only reason why this isn't a perfect scene is because you can tell a little too easily where the cuts are. If they had hidden them more or really went balls to the wall and did it all in one take, this movie could have gone up in my overall rating by quite a little bit. It's a fantastic scene, and once the movie is out to watch at home, it's worth searching for. It's so good, and again, the lack of music really shows a lot of restraint that pays off. If only the story around that action scene were as good, this movie could have been super memorable. This is just about the only thing I'll remember about Atomic Blonde by the end of the year, except for the overall bland tone the rest of the film left me with. Leitch's direction outside of the action is unfortunately a little too showy. Lots of sped up footage and weirdly commanded visuals. Not that the cinematography is bad, it's actually one of the better aspects of the film. It has some cool 80s neon visual flair to it at times, clashing against the desaturated coldness of the East Berlin setting. I mean more of the general style itself. It just feels a little too much for a spy movie. You can make a spy flick that has a lot of style to it, but this feels much more like it would fit in an action movie, but the script is much more of an espionage flick. It's just clashing a little too hard between the director's forte and what the script called for. Atomic Blonde is really a bit of a disappointment to me. I wasn't expecting an action masterpiece or anything, more just a good time with some cool action scenes. And while some of the action was good and one of the set pieces was truly great, I just don't think that the film on the whole worked. I was mostly bored through the film's pretty decently long-feeling runtime. When I wasn't bored, I was confused, and when I wasn't confused either, I was genuinely entertained. But those moments were few and far between. Maybe it needed more action scenes, or a better script with more interesting characters and a more intriguing plot, or a director that really knew what to do with the script that we already have, or a marketing team that knew how to advertise this movie more accurately. But there's just a lot that doesn't work. While the visuals are nice, the soundtrack is pretty good, if unfitting at times, decent performances and well-directed action were good, there's just too much pulling this one down as an average movie for me to give any real sort of recommendation to it.